Okay.
As the world is on fire over the darkness of Rachel, sorry, let me take two on that. Do it one more time.
Rachel. Who's Rachel?
How can we continue to be lights in dark times? That is the question of Judaism and civil rights at this hour. As the world is on fire over the darkness of racial prejudice and injustice that has been sweeping through North America over these past few months, all of us are asking ourselves, how can we respond as Jews? The prophetic tradition, especially during the high holidays, is clear from Isaiah 49:6 that we are meant to be an Or
No.
LaGoyim, a light unto the
Mm.
nations. But not only do we follow the prophetic path of Isaiah, we also walk in the footsteps of our great teacher from JTS, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who marched arm
Rachel.
in arm with Dr. Martin Luther King in Selma. And so I now turn to an old friend and former congregant of mine from
Corey.
San Francisco, whose name is Rosemary Rothstein. Her Hebrew name is Simcha Tshuva. And I ask you, Simcha Tshuva, what words of advice and encouragement do you give to the next generation at this very important moment in our transformation as human beings and as Jews? How can we respond, and what is the advice you give us in terms of creating allyship between the Jewish community and the Black community here in North America and throughout the world?
Well, I think the first thing we have to find is in our hearts that we are the same people. We share a history of oppression generationally, and it's scarred, I think, both communities. And I think we have to realize within our hearts that we are all B'Tselem Elohim. I think that's the big thing. And once we get there, and also then what that looks like is what we look like. When you look across the room, across the street, in a situation, when you see that man with this knee, is choking to death under that policeman's knee, he's B'Tselem Elohim. They both are. And we have to, I think in a way, that's why I love my name, Tshuva. We have to get back to our best selves.
And what would you encourage both young adults as well as children as some strategies for getting back to our best selves? I love the way that you put it, that we're all B'Tselem Elohim, we're created in the divine imprint. But what does that look like when you're on the street and when you're talking to kids as well as to young adults? How can we give them a sense of hope to step forward into this moment in history?
Well, I think that one of the things you tell children the truth to begin with. I was reading what this woman teaches her children when they went to a demonstration. She explained to them that they were there because Black people weren't safe. And the little boy listened and he watched and he finally understood that what was being talked about was about Black people. He said, but we're white people and we're safe. And she explained to me, yes, we have to tell them the truth.
And the truth is that we're all interconnected, right? Beyond all
But
these
for hope,
labels.
but hope is something I think you have to grow. Remember the thing about the crack?
Mm-hmm.
Inside the crack, that's where the hope is. That's all I
Mm-hmm.
can say. Because hope. I'm going to be 71 in September, and when I was their age, there were dogs and men with hoses, and the hope was that this was going to work. And I guess the hope is that we have to keep at it. We have to pray every day. We have to remember B'Tselem Elohim, but we have to keep on keeping on. We can't just pass legislation. We can't just say a prayer. We can't just make a donation. We have to go out and live it.
And so Rosie, when the
yeah.
prophet is saying to us, building on your words, "Halo zet som evrachehu, pateach chartzubot resha, hater agodot mota, ushlach ratzutzim chafashim v'chol mata tenaktehu." This is Isaiah 58:6. This is not the fast that I desire, to unlock the fetters of the wickedness and to untie the cords of the yoke and to let the oppressed go free, to break off every yoke. Isaiah is speaking to us in shul right now and saying, this is not the fast that I desire unless you are unlocking the fetters of wickedness and untying the cords of the yoke and allowing people who are oppressed to be free. then what's the purpose of this fast? So we're having this call to action while we're sitting in synagogue. It seems almost like a contradiction, but that's part of what the
But see,
prophet is saying.
I think too, though, the call to action is to see when we're sitting in synagogue, the racism sitting there with us
Tell me
within the
more. Yeah.
community. Yeah, but even if it's there with one person, you have to clear it out. And I
That
think
racism that's
some
sitting with us.
right, and maybe the fast you have to give up is the racism and the bigotry, but it's there sitting with us, and that's what we have to do. And it's subtle. I could tell stories that we're not telling stories, but it's there. I mean, to be a Jew and to walk into a black Jew and walk into a synagogue and be asked like, "What are you doing here?" or being snubbed, and you know it's because of color. You have to root that out.
So it's not just with our kids and with our young adults, but it's with
Oh yeah, well
our
adults.
regulars as well, to teach them about hospitality and
Yes, and so
being
when you
not
ask what you
judgmental.
can do, yeah, start with yourself. Start with the Beth-El Elohim in you, and perfect that as best you can, and let that be the light you're carrying out.
Amen. Selah. And
This is too cute. I even put lipstick on. This charger.
so welcome to one and all. I'm Rabbi Glazer, and I'm very honored to be able to be here with you tonight for this very important series of dialogues that we're going to be sharing, called Being Lights in Dark Times, Judaism and Civil Rights Today. As the world is on fire over the darkness of racial injustice and discrimination across North America, the question that I'm going to be asking each of our guests is, how are we meant to respond as Jews? The prophetic tradition following Isaiah 49:6 is very clear in its call that we are meant to all be an or lagoyim, light unto the nations. Not only do we follow the prophetic path of Isaiah, but we also walk in the footsteps of our teacher, Abraham Joshua Heschel, who marched arm in arm with Dr. Martin Luther King in Selma. And when he did that, he explained to his students and his colleagues he canceled classes because he felt like his legs were praying. And so I welcome you this evening to meet a remarkable human being and fellow Jew. Her name is Rosemary Rothstein, also known as Simchat Shuva, and I wanted to welcome you to meet her. And if you have questions, please post them in the chat. I wanted to start, perhaps, Rosie, if you would just tell us just a little bit about your story in terms of how you arrived into this moment of becoming Simchat Shuva as a woman of color and a Jew by choice, and maybe reflect a little bit about all the history that you've seen to get to where we are now, and how you remain so hopeful and so positive.
Oh, well. My first impulse was in my kitchen one day when I realized I could not be buried with my husband. And we tried celebrating both Christian and religion doing rituals, and it didn't quite work for him. There was no connection, and for me, it was an easy move. And I was also fascinated by the concept of tikkun olam. That in Christianity, your life, and also in Christianity, your life as a good person is really, I want to say performance, but it's important for you to be good so you have a good afterlife. Well, meanwhile, in Judaism, the emphasis is just the opposite. This is it. This is where we're going to be good and the best people we can be. Tikkun olam. And so I went down to Beth Shalom with Rabbi Lou and Dorothy Richmond, studied. And I found the rituals very satisfying. And I was made to feel very welcome there. What was the rest of the question?
And so that's a very on one foot summary of your journey to
right, to
embracing
Judaism and a lot
Judaism.
but a lot of study with you. I did the Zohar and the Psalms. I've not done Pirkei Avot. I've done some study of the language. I've done some Talmud.
And you've also were one of our favorite Torah readers at Beth-El when I was serving
And I've
there.
read some Torah.
So tell us,
But
Rosie.
there's lots of ways to serve. I like that.
Okay, lots of ways to serve. So maybe you can give us some, Talia, did you have a question you wanted to ask before I steal your question?
I'm doing
We'll
fine.
wait until
Thank you
you're
for
done.
asking.
Well, Talia, I think you have, I know you had a couple questions. I don't want to step on your toes. So you go first, sweetie, and then I'll ask some other ones.
Okay.
Yeah.
And other folks can ask as well.
It was a little bit of you.
So what's your question for Rosie, Tal?
How do you how can you make a change and help things along if you can't physically be at the protests?
I know what you mean. I have the same issue. I think things like this, and I think one of the big things we have to change, I was saying to your dad before, is how, so good to see you, sweetheart, is that we have to change, each person, each of us, we talk about Isaiah being a light. And I was reading this article and it was called, How Do You Know You're Not Raising the Next Amy Cooper? You know who she was? The lady in Central Park who called the black man who was a bird watcher.
Mm.
And she said it made it sound like she was being raped. And there's a whole trope around white men being in danger around black men. And so you make sure that you don't become that person, that you work on your heart, but you don't divine people's action by some prejudice you have about them, whether it's like a black person or a woman or a person of a certain age. Because we've got to do a lot of inner healing to make this work. We have so many things in us that we learn just from being out there. I mean, when I was a young girl, and this will sound very strange, but I learned that when white people got wet, they smell like a chicken coop. And I had never smelled the chicken coop. And I was like, for many, many years, I didn't want to be around anyone who was wet and white because my grandmother had chickens at one point. And so that was the thing I carried with me. It wasn't dangerous, but it was silly, but I could have repeated it, But you have to be, as I was saying, your father, the best person you can be, and in the image of God, B'Tselem Elohim is everybody. It's tall, it's short, it's dark. But that's what you have to do. You have to be the best person you can be. And when you see someone being unkind, do what you can about making it not happen. Be kind. And then when you go out there, you'll be all, ready in your head and your heart to, be kind to someone you meet. And if you, I don't know if you have people, at the synagogue who might be alone by themselves. Now call them and say hello. That'll be a thing you can do. Because it's not just about color, it's about taking care of everyone, I think. But especially, what's that say, things that are false bigotry.
Talia, did you want to follow that up with one other question you had there, sweetie?
And you want to do some action, huh? It's very hard. I don't know, because I feel that here in San Francisco, we can't go out and march either. But this is the thing that I'm doing now. This might help.
What should the
Jewish
response be to anti-black racism?
I think it's. You mean you want to do it in terms of a piece from Torah, or? You see, I think that it's not just a Jewish response; it's a human response. It's got to be the human response, and we can't make it a Jewish response or a Latinx response. It's got to be a response of good from everyone, and we can sort it all out, who's doing it after it's done. But I think when you start labeling and separating off, you're setting up yourself for a situation that will lead to bigotry, because maybe the Jewish, I remember once when I was in Yad Vashem, there was a woman there who had been, I guess her parents had been killed in the Holocaust, and she was in such anguish. I think she was mentally ill, but she was presenting herself to people and just saying how much she had suffered. And I said to her, well, my people have suffered too. We can't blame my sufferings more than yours or better than yours. It's all suffering. So you can just call someone at the synagogue, see if they want to play Zoom bingo or something. Because there are a lot of lonely people out there now.
It's true. It's true.
And then,
Thank you.
and every time you do something good, I think it ripples out through the world like, you know, an ocean, like in the lake, you know. And then when the revolution comes, you can go outside with your mask. You're ready. Yeah. You'll be that little girl that gets in front of the black person when the police come. Did you see that one? Yeah, that'll be you. So you're ready. You just can't go out there yet. And also by staying in right now, you're doing a good thing. You know, you're doing one of the best things you can do. That the times give you your assignment. Yeah.
Thank you, Tal.
Good questions,
So
though.
other questions people have that they wanted to ask or hear from Rosie in terms of her own life experience?
See, I think it's sometimes difficult for me to speak of this because I grew up in the suburbs of Fort Lauderdale in kind of a parallel black, believe it, the beaver world. And so I didn't have a lot of experience with racism, really and truly. And then I moved from there to you saw where I lived in San Francisco.
Yeah.
You know, I don't have a very integrated world myself. Once you count a lot of, you know, Chinese people, which is a major, you know, majority group around here. But I know, and I think one thing about this too is it's exhausting. And right now we have people out there protesting, but those people will get tired of protesting and legislation will be passed, like with the Civil Rights Act, and then people like me won't have to go to separate bathrooms or a different movie theater, and then we'll forget that there are problems. And so I think we have to stay vigilant, and if you choose the thing that you want to care about, when you vote for that person, you call their office once a week or check the website to see what they're doing, but participate.
It's
And I
important.
think,
It's important to remain active and not to become despondent. And as Jews, part of our task
well,
is
I
to
don't think
remain
Jews should be
hopeful.
despondent because this is a sorrow Jews know.
Right.
You know, we're expert at this. This is the same history of a persecution for just being that, you know?
And we were talking earlier, Rosie, thinking forward to the words of Isaiah in another context, which we'll be reading during the Haftorah on Yom Kippur, when Isaiah calls out to all of us sitting in shul and says, "Halo zeh tzom evcharehu, pater charutzubot resha." No, this is the fast that I desire. Remember when Isaiah says this? This is the fast that I desire. I want you to unlock the fetters of wickedness, to untie the cords of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke. That is what I want you to do, to share your bread with the hungry and to take the wretched poor into your home. So any reflections on where we're going in terms of looking forward to the words of the prophet that are going to be coming to us and in just a few months together, as to kind of what Kali was asking, what words of encouragement can we give to the next generation, to our children and to our young adults who are wondering, how are we supposed to respond as Jews? Because you're right, it is a human issue, Rosie,
Right.
but I also think there's a particular Jewish response that we have to live up to.
Yeah, but I think that comes from having to carry the chains of anti-Semitism, that we have to cut those chains. It's the same, I guess because I've had the multi-religious experience, I see it as such a universal issue. You see now the demonstrations are all over the world. But as Jews, gosh, you have to be the best human being. You can be the best Beth-El Elohim.
And being that best one, though, it's grounded and rooted in our particularism as we reach out to the universal, though. That's what you're saying, I'm hearing.
Yeah, to untie the cords of the yoke, first your own, to let the oppressed go free, to break off every yoke. It is to share your bread with the hungry. We could do that for sure. Tell you, write a check. Yeah, but there's much to be done.
And what about when we were
feeding.
talking earlier, you mentioned to me, you said something very, very provocative that really I found fascinating. You said when we're sitting in synagogue together in a few months from now, and we read these words on Yom Kippur, we also have to look at the racism
The
that is sitting
racism
beside us in the
within
pews.
beside us,
So
yes.
what does that mean? I'm assuming we're going to be sitting in the pews, but what does
We're
that mean,
sitting in,
sitting beside us? What is that? Is that inside of me? I have that
well, not
tendency?
well, you have that knowledge because we're raised here in the Americas, that we'll call it, the states, in the white world. I'll say not just the white world, but because there are differences, yes, it is inside of us, and it must be something we have to examine.
And what better time to do that kind of
And
self-examination
yes,
of
as we're doing
myself when I'm with
self-examination,
others who are doing that work too?
right? And I think as you sit there, that you have, it sounds like you're prime minister now, thinking. 21 seconds. I think it's a self-examination, and maybe the fetters of which we're speaking here are the ones that are holding us. And I said before that we don't know it's there, but it's what we learn as children. It's how we learn to mistreat each other. It's how we pick out a little thing about someone else that's a bad thing, and we try to destroy them for it.
And the experts are saying that as early as 2 to 4 years old, children already pick up these cues. So we have to
But the
start at a
doll
very,
is, yeah,
yeah, we have to start at a
yeah,
very young
yeah,
age, teaching them to be tolerant and to understand from our shared values that, as you said,
right.
this is an issue of B'Tselem Elohim and Kavod HaBriyot, that we're created in the divine
Oh, that
imprint,
one, yes,
and that we have to
yes.
respect the dignity of all human beings, even when they look different
And
than
to see
us.
Beth-El Elohim in everyone,
Right.
regardless of the shape, the color, the preference, the gender, all the things that make us the wonderful people that we are. We have to remember that and care for that. And a little tikkun olam, a lot of that. But that's going to be the big thing. And for people like Talia, the hope and the hope is that I was her age once, and this was begun or was being carried on. And I think all problems in the human condition, we pray, sometimes we're in the big pit P, sometimes we're the angels. But it's not something you can sit and say, I prayed today. I don't ever have to pray, again, because I don't have to ever work on my spiritual being again, because I did it today, but it's ongoing for as long as you have voice.
It's not just on
It
Yom
can,
Kippur once a year.
as long as you have voice, and then that having that voice and maintaining that voice, it's like saying Kaddish. It gives you a reconnection with the spirit. It reinforces your belief in the face of the worst thing you think that's going to happen, and it might be the worst thing right now, but the prayer, a few psalms, and the community, however you have to gather it. Sometimes it's a phone call, a note to someone. That's where we get that's our B'Tselem Elohim that we're responsible for taking care of. And that is something we have done. And sometimes like now, it doesn't go well, but we have people just asking questions like now and talking about it and caring about it. That will be what will make it work.
Thank you, Rosie. I want to turn to some other folks that are just joining us, and especially to Paul. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I know that you're very involved in your community, and you've shared with us in our synagogue community your connections with the indigenous community here in Quebec. And I'm wondering if there's any question you may have, just in terms of sort of creating the or opening up the conversation that might be interesting to pose to Rosie about your experiences and in relationship to what's going on in her life.
Well, I like, actually, Rita just posted this in the group chat to everybody, that prejudice is not just about race, it's about people seeing people as other and judging them favorably based on their otherness.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's actually really interesting, because I hear the same thing from Indigenous people. It's the unknown. So you just, especially if you're if you live in your bubble, if you live in your white world bubble and
Yes.
get out and you see the way certain peoples are portrayed, then you go in with a preconceived notion. And that's the great thing, Rabbi. I think you talked about this earlier today about, children as young as 2 years old
Mm-hmm.
who aren't influenced whatsoever, but can start to be, because it's a learned behavior. And it really is the same thing, no matter which race, is what I found.
Yes.
Certainly working with Aboriginal peoples.
It sounds like it's the challenge, Paul, is what do we do when we're no longer
So
4 years old?
Education. Immersing yourself as much as possible. I hate to admit it, I had notions going in.
yes.
People close to me had notions of what it was like, being with Indigenous people. And it applies all around. I mean, how many times have we heard it as Jews?
Yes.
Oh, Jewish? I don't know any Jews, or Jews are cheap, or whatever. We hear those things, right? And so everybody
And you
has their
take them in. You take them in. Yes. Go on. Sorry.
No, please go ahead.
I was just giving you an amen. You take them in though, and you don't mean to. And it's very hard to undo, because usually the source is an adult, a trusted teacher. But I go on.
I also find it's the way that we take it in, the way we react to it, right? We can meet people. I'll never forget. I was 19 years old, and I was in a complete French community in mid-northern Quebec for the summer, with kids around my age and slightly younger, in a program to live in French. And one night we went out to let loose at a local drinking establishment, and one guy bought shots for the table. Sorry, Tom, you don't know anything about this. And
every Saturday morning.
and the shots came back, and he found that they were small. And so he just started on every Jewish stereotype that you can think of. I think I started to physically shake. I wanted to reach across the table and wring his neck. And somebody sitting next to me who knew I was Jewish, grabbed my leg under the table and she dug her fingernails into me to get me to calm down. And then I started asking him, "You ever met a Jewish person?"
Right.
By the end of the night, he was my best friend. He felt so badly. And I thought, you know what? The lesson here is patience, patience, patience.
And education.
It's such an unbelievably difficult thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the hard part in it. So it's patience and education. And how do you educate an entire population? How do you have the patience to do so when you're the one being discriminated against? And we're not visible minority. I'm not. And so I can't even begin to comprehend what that's like.
I have a question from Morton, if I can share that. So Rosie, and then if you want to answer this, you're welcome to. He wants to know, do you think that the protests now are different from those at other times? Is this an inflection point?
Inflection point, I don't know, but they are different because one thing, they're international. And one thing, there are a lot of people of color, including white people, who are present. And I think that will make a difference. And it's also happening in a time in history where more people, as Paul was pointing out, know people from other cultures. And so we'll have less other happening. So yes, I think it is different. When I was young, I mentioned before, it was the German Shepherds and the fire hose. And I don't know if I think the knee on the neck is worse, but yes, I am more hopeful that this won't have to happen again in the next, 50 years. We'll have to do it again. Burn down cities because of race situations, race prejudice. Besides, probably everyone will be intermarried and related, perhaps. And you can't fight me, I'm your cousin.
Right.
You know,
That sense of everyone being able to come to pray. That's another a vision of the prophets, to come pray in one language in one place,
yes,
right? But we speak
yes,
so many languages and we don't listen to each other. So it is about patience. It is about education. It's also, I
yes,
think, about listening compassionately, like you were able to
yes,
do with those nails in your thigh there, Paul. That eventually we learned to listen compassionately, even
yes,
though our response is always to lash out, like to go into fight or flight mode. It's hard. It's hard to be human.
yes.
Speaking of that and the violence that you brought up, Rosemary, is I'm just wondering, does that add to the message, or does it detract from the message?
I mean, the violence?
Is it a little of both?
Well, I'm here in San Francisco, and it seems to me when the people who came in, who came in and did a lot of the looting, they came in a really organized fashion. That was peripheral.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was just because it was opportunistic. And at some point, you had the protesters actually stopping looters. So I think that was a lot of it was opportunistic. I don't think the people who are sincerely interested are looting. There's just a lot of gunnif. And it is distracting. And you see now we're having the demonstrations without the looting. The last few nights have been quiet because now I think it's those who really care about the problem. And a lot of the protesters have gone back and helped store owners clean up the messes. But I do really, really, really hope that Talia won't be my age talking to a bunch of people about some problem with prejudice. I'm
Amen.
70,
Amen.
Talia, so
Amen.
work on it, okay?
Amen. Heather has a
Well,
question.
you and your friends. I mean, just that I'm talking to Rosie, to a little white girl in Canada, you know, and I'm not her father's maid.
So I have
Story.
one more question for Heather. I'm being mindful of time, but Heather has
Oh,
another question, and we'll close with that for tonight.
It's actually not so much a question, but I just wanted to comment because my family is in Minneapolis, where a lot of this stuff is happening. And you're right. There's a lot of opportunists as far as the looting.
yeah.
But in the case of the arson in Minnesota, it's not people of color, and it is definitely organized.
Yeah, it's strange.
Yeah, it's very very suspicious.
I mean, they come in like caravans of cars, and they all come out and they swoop and they're gone. Yeah, that's
right.
yeah.
And they take off their license plates and but I just want to say a lot. I think there's been a lot of people pointing and saying, about things getting out of control with protests, and the people who are doing this, they are not connected with protests.
No, not a lot. No, not.
And yeah, and whoever they are, one thing is clear, and that is that they are white people.
They're thieves. They're just thieves. I mean, you see them. They're just stealing things. They're doing good shopping. They're just stealing things. But it's an opportunity because it's a time of confusion. The police are watching the Black people, so they'll never bother us.
Well, the looting has been a mix of people. When you talk about people actually taking stuff, but the arsons, the running around the city trying to burn things down, that's
dangerous.
Yeah. Anyways.
And if we go back just to close with the words of the prophet that we opened with, the Haftorah for Yom Kippur is so powerful because Isaiah doesn't say burn it down. He doesn't say steal. Yeah. He says, Solu solu panu darech, harimu michshol miderech ami. He says, build up a highway, clear a road, remove all the obstacles from the road of my people. So there's a big difference, and I think there's a lot we can learn from the prophet in terms of messages of pacifism, of civil disobedience, of doing things with the values that we hold dear and important, to be able to get a message across in a way that's constructive without being destructive, that is focusing our attention, as you said, Paul, and not distracting us from what's really important. And that's part of the agenda that is I think, derailing some of these very sincere hearts that want to see change. And then ultimately, Rosie, as you were saying, it has to translate back into legislation and to the way that we live our lives in civil society. We can't burn everything down. Isaiah is saying,
No.
be clear, create a new roadway, create a new path, and find a way to remove the obstacles. And that happens when we engage in this process of dialogue and this process of tshuva together. So I want to thank everyone for coming this evening. Next week, we're going to be visited by another friend and teacher of mine. Rosie, you are definitely a teacher of mine, and I send you blessings all the way from Montreal on behalf of my family and myself. Next week, it's going to be Rabbi Rose, who is, or Rose, the co-director of Circle, the Center for Interreligious and Community Leadership Education, which is a joint project between Hebrew College in Boston and the Andover Newton Theological School. He's been doing some fascinating work in terms of education across religious communities together, teaching teachers and preachers and rabbis and folks that are serving in their respective religious communities how to be able to reach out and to make a change. So join us next week for that. And then following that, Martine Saint-Victoire is going to be joining us. She has already been with us for a Bima dialogue. She's a wonderful, wonderful human being, the founder of Milagro Public Relations. And of course, she was born in Trois-Rivières to Haitian parents and has a deep love for the Haitian community, both here and abroad, and also a lot of wonderful things to share with us. And then we may have one other yet to be determined speaker and guest that's going to be joining us for the last session on the 29th, still to be confirmed. But stay safe, stay sound, and remember the words of the prophet, Solu Tsolu Panu Derech. Build up a highway and clear away the obstacles from a place of peace, of love, of compassion, and justice. Erev Tov. And thank you to Rosie.
Be
Thank you to you
kind.
all.
Be kind.
Good to